Troy stood on deck and looked towards the horizon. His prickles bristled in the cold sea air, as he remembered the rhyme old Uncle Peg-Leg Reg had taught him. Red sky at night, hedgehog's delight. Red sky in the morning, weasel's warning.
Morning. Brief in your cubbyhole, you miss it.
Never mind brief, curt to the point of rudeness, I'd say.
What?
Stephen, I bought that door so people would have something to knock on.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Mrs. Troy, I'm run off them this morning. 2 double bookings and a no-show. I sometimes think running chambers is a bit like having a stable at Newmarket. Pitchfork would come in handy.
A little more hay in the nose bag wouldn't do any harm. What is it, anyway? Not another divorce. I'm sick of people and their petty domestic problems.
Oh, me too. Get all that at home. No, it's quite an interesting one, Mrs. Troy. I thought you'd like to have it. Something to get your teeth into.
Why, what is it, then?
Cannibalism.
Cannibalism? Well, it'll cost them an arm and a leg.
Aha!
Susan! Workies!
Well, it seems unprecedented.
Can't be. There's nothing new in the world of crime. Even originality is an infringement of copyright.
But can you actually have a murder trial without a body?
Yes, of course, why not? What about that gangland killing back in '85? All they could do was point to the motorway and say he's in there somewhere.
I suppose that's what you call concrete evidence.
Boom.
Ah, here's a precedent. Back in 1856, another shipwreck. The cabin boy.
Dudley and Stevens.
Apparently he was already on the way out. Seemed ashamed to waste him.
Keep looking.
But there aren't any witnesses either. Are there? I mean, no victim, no witness. No case, I'd have thought.
There is mute but eloquent testimony, Susan, which by its very silence speaks volumes.
What's that?
The missing man's wedding ring.
Why? Where did they find it?
In the survivor's stomach. Does stick in your throat a bit, doesn't it?
We both worked in advertising, you see, Mrs. Troy, quite successfully. In fact, we helped to get the present government elected.
Well, there won't be any reason to mention that to the jury.
This round-the-world trip was a sort of once-in-a-lifetime thing.
How far did you get, exactly?
Oh, over halfway. We made a couple of stops for refits and so on, and we stopped once or twice to take on extra crew. We were on the return leg when we had the collision.
With what?
A whale.
A whale?
Yes. I don't know what happened. You know, it almost seemed to attack the boat in a way.
Maybe it mistook you for Norwegian, Mr. Clements. Should have had your Greenpeace T-shirt on.
Not just at the moment, if you don't mind, Arthur.
Yes, sorry.
Anyway, the boat went down in minutes. It was terrifying. We only just had time to get the life rafts off, and that was it. We lashed them together so that we wouldn't get separated. After we'd been at sea for about a month, I woke up one morning and Brian had gone. That's all I know. I never saw him again.
How did you keep going, Mr. Clements, once you'd run out of supplies?
Rainwater when it fell. Fish.
Fish?
When I could catch them.
How did you cook them?
I didn't.
Morning, Gerald.
Mrs. Troy.
Persecuting again, I see.
Prosecuting, yes. Makes you wonder what sort of world we're living in when a man can eat his friends.
It's called the world of free enterprise, isn't it, Gerald? In fact, I thought you voted for it. Excuse me.
And thus it came to pass, my lord, that the accused was eventually picked up by a Cornish trawler and brought into port suffering from acute exposure.
Acute exposure, yes.
While in hospital, my lord, the accused complained of serious abdominal pains.
I get those.
And it was found necessary to intervene medically. Some portions of undigested bone were removed, along with a man's wedding ring engraved with the faint but discernible initials BD. BD, my lord, are the initials of Mr. Clements' absent sailing companion, and it was upon this discovery that the police were called in.
Thank you, Mr. Triggs. Your first witness?
I should like to call Captain Theodore Swift, my lord.
Call Captain Swift, and quick about it.
So, you spotted the life raft, Captain Swift, and you passed not by on the other side. You stopped your trawler. What then?
Well, we got him on board and realised who he was, so I asked him about his partner, thinking he might still be out there.
Yes, and how did he reply? Do you remember his exact words?
Well, I said, "Where's your mate, son? Isn't he with you?" And he said, "Yeah, but he's gone."
What then?
Well, we offered him something to eat, but he said he wasn't hungry.
Or didn't you find that extremely unusual?
Well, yes. I mean, 8 weeks with 3 weeks' rations. You would have thought he'd been able to manage a couple of pasties.
Thank you, Captain Swift. No further questions.
Swift, after 8 weeks adrift at sea, what would your reaction be if someone waved a couple of pasties onto your nose?
Well, I would have given it some thought.
But is it not the case that prolonged malnutrition can lead to suppression of appetite?
Well, he didn't look that malnourished. I mean, he wasn't exactly Slim Pickens.
My lord, Slim Pickens, I believe, was an actor in cowboy films.
Thank you, Mr. Triggs. We are indebted to you for that.
I mean, it must have been eating something out there. I mean, he wasn't getting pizza delivered.
Did Mr. Clements smell when you brought him on board, Captain?
Smell, I should say. He smelt of fish. He couldn't have stank much worse.
Oh, really? I suppose he couldn't have stank much worse, Captain Swift, because stanking much worse would have been a lot less good than learning how to speak more better.
Mrs. Troy.
Just attempting to illustrate the widespread misuse of the double comparative, my lord.
If we could forget the grammar for the moment, Mrs. Troy, and stick to the case proper.
Properly, my lord.
Instantly, Mrs. Troy.
So, why do you think he smelt of fish? Because he'd been eating them, perhaps?
I suppose.
So fish alone could have kept him alive.
Well, if he'd caught enough. But what I'd like to know is how he managed to do that without as much as a fish hook. I mean, I've got a net a mile long, and there are some days when all I come back with is the one that got away.
Yes, it was fortunate that you happened to be out in your trawler when you picked up Mr. Clements, wasn't it, Captain?
From his point of view, yeah.
So you hadn't yet filled your quota for the month, then?
Quota?
Your fishing quota?
Oh, fishing quota.
Had you not filled it for the month? I must remind you before you answer that copies of the fisheries returns are available upon request.
Well, well, maybe I had reached my quota, but we weren't exactly fishing at the time. We were more involved in net trials.
Net trials? Oh, I see. So you were out in your trawler with a full crew, using expensive diesel, the whole trip probably costing many £1,000s, purely for the purpose of net trials?
Safety first is what I always say, ma'am. You can't be too careful at sea. As many a skipper has come to grief through not fully testing his nets.
Thank you, Captain Swift. Having heard the explanation of why you were at sea that day, I feel sure the jury will be able to gauge accurately the quality of the rest of your evidence. Thank you. No further questions.
Well, we did save his life, you know.
Yes, Captain Swift, and we greatly appreciate your actions. You may stand down.
Well, if anyone thinks it's an easy life, let him walk a mile in my Wellingtons.
There. Press on, Mr. Triggs.
If I may call the next witness for the Crown, my lord, I had to call Mrs. Rosemary Pope.
Call the Pope.
Mrs. Pope.
Call the Pope's missus.
Mrs. Pope, can you tell the court who you are?
I was the consultant in charge of the intensive care ward where Mr. Clements was taken after his rescue from the sea.
And in what medical condition was he?
He was suffering from acute exposure and dehydration, and he had pneumonia. He also had some very unpleasant sores on his body caused by his constant contact with the seawater. But mentally, he was fairly alert and overall, considering his ordeal, in remarkably good health.
In all respects?
He did complain of abdominal pains.
I get those.
Upon investigation, these proved to be due to what?
To some partially digested bone matter and a ring lodged in the intestine.
These items?
Yes.
Exhibits 1 and 2, my lord, if the jury would like to see them.
I don't know if they would, Mr. Triggs, considering where they've been, but hand them around.
And were you able to identify the exact nature of these bones, Mrs. Pope?
They seem to be the remains of finger joints. Knuckles.
Knuckles? And to the best of your knowledge, Mrs. Pope, are there any fish in the sea with knuckles?
Fish don't have knuckles, Mr. Triggs. What a preposterous proposition.
If I may help, learned counsel, my
Yes,
lord.
please, Mrs. Troy.
I think perhaps the counsel is confusing in his mind fish knuckles with fish nuggets, my lord. Although it seems to me that these fish knuckles are nothing but red herrings.
Very good, Mrs. Troy.
I'm merely trying to make a point by asking a rhetorical question. That is a question that does not require an answer,
Well,
my
if your
lord.
questions don't require an answer, Mr. Triggs, what is the witness doing here?
I fear I am unable to answer that, my lord, as that is in itself also something of a rhetorical question.
Well, if no one's going to answer any questions in this court, well, how can we have a trial? Can someone answer that?
Seems to be going rather well for us, doesn't it?
If I may conduct my examination in my own way, my lord.
Yes, very well. Conduct an examination. I think he needs one.
So, these bone fragments were conclusively of animal origin, Mrs. Pope?
I would say so.
Of human origin?
That is my opinion.
Thank you, Mrs. Pope. No further questions.
Mrs. Troy, you wish to muscle in on the knuckles.
Mrs. Pope, it being the case, as his lordship has so brilliantly established, that fish lack knuckles, is it not yet also true that some fish do have a very large skeletal structure?
Yes, I suppose.
Sharks, for example. Swordfish, dolphins, seahorses, octopus even.
Mrs. Troy, are you attempting to tell this court that the reason why the accused had undigested bits of bone inside him was because he'd swallowed an octopus?
I'm trying to show, my lord, that large fragments of bone can have maritime as well as animal origin.
And what about the ring, Mrs. Troy? This was a married octopus, was it? No doubt swimming away from the registry office at the time, with bits of tins rattling behind him.
Not going so well now.
I wish to put to the witness, my lord, the very real possibility that the fragments of bone we see here are not conclusively of animal origin.
Ah, Mrs. Pope.
I am satisfied in my own mind that the bones are undoubtedly animal.
Satisfied on the basis of what qualifications, Mrs. Pope?
On the qualification of a first-class honours degree and a doctorate, of having published internationally acclaimed research, and of being one of the first ever women consultants to be appointed to her post.
I see. No real qualifications in particular, then.
Very well, I propose we adjourn now for lunch. Now, I had intended to recommend today the chop house to you, members of the jury, but considering the nature of the case, I think perhaps the vegetarian snack bar along the street would be better. I would avoid the lentils if I were you. Court adjourned. Corporal Royce.
So your husband and Mr. Clements have known each other for some time, Mrs. Dart.
Oh, yes. Brian and Bill were very good friends. More like brothers, really. They sailed a lot together, and this trip was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Bill's girlfriend and I, well, we sort of depended on each other when they went missing.
A very difficult time, Mrs. Dart.
Yeah. I suppose after the first month, we more or less gave up hope.
Mrs. Dart, I know this will be painful for you, but did you recognise this ring when you examined it?
Yes, that's Brian's wedding ring.
Are you sure?
Well, as sure as I can be. It's just a plain, ordinary ring, but those are his initials.
And did you recognise these? No, perhaps not. No further questions.
No questions, my lord, but I hope I'll be there when learned counsel receives his Nobel Prize for tact. I now wish to call the defendant, Mr. William Clements.
Call Mr. Wilfred Lemons.
So you were on the return leg of your journey, Mr. Clements?
Yes, that's it. We'd taken someone on in Australia as crew for part of the journey, and he'd agreed to work the passage with us in return for a lift to Panama. We stopped there, let him off. We ended up staying for about 10 days to do some minor repairs.
And you then resumed your journey?
Yes, that's right. We were about 14 days out of Panama when the boat got rammed.
So what then, Mr. Clements?
Oh, well, we took to the emergency life rafts and we lashed them together and basically just drifted.
And how did you come to be in possession of Mr. Dart's wedding ring?
We talked about dying. Some days were so unbearable you wanted to die. Brian gave me his wedding ring and said that if I made it back and he didn't, I was to give it to his wife. Give it to his wife with his love.
Difficult times, Mr. Clements.
Yes.
Now, how did you catch fish without a hook?
With the ring. I used it as a lure on the end of some cotton. When I got thirsty, I sucked on the ring to try and make the saliva come. I choked on it. It's hard to explain here to someone who doesn't know what thirst and hunger and despair really are.
Thank you, Mr. Clements.
Mr. Triggs, you're shot if you've kept your powder dry.
My lord, now, Mr. Clements, had there been any friction between you and Mr. Dart on this long voyage round the world?
My lord, it would be difficult to have a short voyage around the world.
Well, Mr. Clements?
No, not really. I mean, no more than you'd expect between two people cooped up together for that length of time.
So there were some disagreements. Violent disagreements, perhaps?
Civilized disagreements.
Now tell me, how long were your survival rations on the raft designed to last?
3 weeks or so.
And how long were you adrift?
8.
Then let me put this scenario to you, Mr. Clements. You and Mr. Dart have been adrift for some weeks, cast out in the watery wilderness, plagued with boils, with no hope of the promised land in sight. You had run out of food, and it was obvious that unless you were picked up soon, you would both die. Or, maybe not. Maybe one of you could survive. I put it to you, Mr. Clements, that driven by a terrible thirst and hunger and a fear for your own death, you crossed that thin line between civilization and chaos, and you descended like the Sodomites.
No, Mr.
That is, like the Philistines, my lord, into murder and into cannibalism. Was it not as I describe, Mr. Clements?
No, it was not. I didn't eat him. Seems the only crime I've committed is to survive.
It is no crime to survive, Mr. Clements. The crime lies in how you do it. No further questions.
You may stand down, Mrs. Troy.
I wish to call Mr. Benjamin Richards, my lord.
Call Mr. Benjamin Pilchards.
Mr. Richards. Mr. Benjamin Richards.
That's me. No problem, no worries at all.
Now, Mr. Richards, I believe that, like Mr. Clements here, you are also the survivor of an ordeal by sea.
That's so. 89 days, all on my own, just me and the sea. But no ill effects, still all aboard upstairs.
Mr. Richards, if I may interrupt, your pockets appear to be bulging somewhat. I hope you haven't brought some kind of offensive weapon into this court, have you?
Just a few biscuits, my lord, just in case. Only I can't offer them round, see, because I might need them myself.
Oh, no, that's quite all right. You keep your biscuits. We wouldn't want to deprive you of those.
Well done, Arthur. Really impressive witness here.
Carry on, Mrs. Troy. I'm intrigued to find out why you've called this witness.
So am I. So, Mr. Richards, 89 days adrift at sea.
That's right. 89 days. Yes, 69. But all perfectly normal, as you can see. So ordinary, it's boring.
And what did you live on throughout your ordeal, Mr. Richards?
Seagulls.
Seagulls?
Bit feathery. Took a bit of chewing, but not too bad after a while. That's how I survived.
I see. So Mr. Clements here could, in your experience, quite conceivably have survived for 51 days without any recourse to cannibalism.
No need, not when there's seagulls. A lot of nourishment in seagulls. I'd grab them by the legs, you see, sneaky like. That's how you do it. Hold them tight and then... That's how I survived. But all perfectly normal.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. No further questions.
Mr. Richards, you say you survived on seagulls. Do seagulls have knuckles?
No. They've got beaks, though.
Exactly. I think that says it all. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. You may stand down. Is there something wrong, Mr. Richards?
Oh, I thought I saw a seagull, sir, up there on the skyline.
Mr. Stanley, would you help Mr. Richards to his seat and be gentle with him? He's suffered enough. Mrs. Troy?
No further witnesses, my lord.
Probably just as well. Mr. Trent, you have some closing remarks?
Yes, I do, my lord. If you could just allow me a moment. I appear to have mislaid page 70 of my notes. Here we are. My lord, members of the jury, fellow Christians, all those who quest for knowledge, all those who search for wisdom, all those who crave enlightenment, I address myself to you. In the beginning.
My lord, members of the jury, fellow creatures, all those who love brevity, all those who have homes to go to, all those who have sat here for the past 3 hours, all those with their cars in short-term car parks, I address myself to you. At the end of the day...
We find him guilty.
Guilty. And is this the verdict of you all?
It is.
Mr. Clements, you've heard the verdict. Years ago at this juncture, it would have been my duty to don a little black cap and pronounce an abominable sentence for an abominable crime. As it is, I have no alternative but to sentence you to imprisonment for life.
Oh, spirited defence, Philippa. Never mind, you can't win them all.
No, well, you should know, Gerald.
Humble in victory, magnanimous in defeat, that's what I always say.
Is it? We'll keep trying.
Yes, well, I must go, if you'll excuse me. I'm having my Bible re-leathered.
Goodbye. Arthur? I don't know if it's sour grapes, but I get this awful feeling whenever he wins a case that there's been some dreadful miscarriage of justice.
Yes, and I get the same feeling when we win one, too.
Thank you. Better go down and see Mr. Clements.
Mrs. Troy, I would, but those little cells, they bring on my claustrophobia, so I'd best leave it to you.
Susan! He wants to appeal.
On what grounds?
He didn't like the verdict.
Well, I shouldn't be too despondent, Mrs. Troy. We all have our failings.
Talking of which, the ancient mariner didn't exactly help. The only thing he lacked was the albatross round his neck. Where did you find him?
In a sailor's home. He's writing a book, actually, called Cooking for Castaways.
I bet the seagull convene's delicious.
Yes, well, I'll be in touch.
Okay. I might cheer myself up and go to the pictures.
Anything on?
Let's see. Entertain. Arthur!
Yes?
Come here.
What?
Grounds for appeal. Missing yachtsman found.
What missing yachtsman?
Brian Dart. He's alive.
Good God! Mr. Triggs won't like this. Brian Dart alive.
The trouble with people, Arthur, they won't lie down until they're dead.
So where'd the other survivor been all that time?
Well, the ship that picked him up wasn't what you call strictly legal.
Ah, flag of convenience, eh?
No more cargo of narcotics, I think. Anyway, they didn't drop him off as quickly as they could have done. But there he is, living proof that my client is as innocent as the sea is wet. Stephen, may I have my magnifying glass?
Have my magnifying glass, and I shall want it back. Which reminds me, I haven't had my sellotape returned yet.
It didn't last long. I didn't think you'd want the cardboard.
And I'm also still owed for those sandwiches.
No. Who owes you for sandwiches?
Well, as a matter of fact...
Harold again, no doubt.
I'm very pleased, obviously. Well, yes, of course I am. Very happy. I want to thank my counsel as well.
Very touching scenes, Mrs. Troy, very touching.
Quite emotional. 3 coffees, please.
Black, please.
Decaffeinated, no sugar, very weak, please.
Cappuccino, please. Extra chocolate and a dollop of cream.
Yes, old friends reunited.
The wrongly imprisoned set free.
Tugs at the heartstrings.
Oh, doesn't it just?
Milks the low-fat tear ducts.
They seem so pleased to see each other, didn't you think, the survivors?
They look more like a couple of conspirators with a secret to me.
Oh?
Look at this photograph. Did you notice? Brian Dart's wedding ring.
Oh, yes.
He's still wearing it after he was rescued.
But that's impossible. I mean, he gave it to Clemens and he swallowed it, didn't he?
Did he?
Well, if he didn't, whose ring was it?
Well, what if there weren't 2 men on that boat when it was shipwrecked? What if there were 3?
3?
Well, they picked up someone to crew in Australia, didn't they?
And dropped him off in Panama.
They said.
Surely don't imagine. I mean, that would mean they both tucked in.
What about the initials on the ring, BD?
Very faint. We make assumptions. BD, RD, RP, AR. Who knows? What do you think, Arthur? Where is he now? That chap they picked up in Australia? Alive and kicking somewhere, or dead and digested?